Right now, I think we'd like to turn to the tables and tell you a story, a very inspiring success story, and it involves a partnership between ONA and the Toronto East General Hospital, which really does serve as a model for how we can work together with our employers to ensure a safer workplace for all.
If there's one key message to take away, it's not about the program at East General, it's about the partnership with our union partners. And that, to me, is the secret sauce of really making a difference. It is about that partnership, and this has been tremendous for safety at Toronto East, both for our patients and our staff, and it's been just a terrific partnership with ONA and Erna. We actually have the whole idea of workplace safety and wellness embedded in our strategic plan. And we have worked really, really hard to try and be a leader in that area, because we fundamentally believe that being an outstanding workplace is the key to delivering outstanding care. Physical aggression and mental aggression in our healthcare workplaces is huge. And violence in healthcare workers is a major, major issue. 20% of physical and sexual assaults overall in our society occur in the workplace, which is a huge number.
When you're trying to engage your leadership, the visuals help, okay? And so when an incident happens, ask, and Andy's really been promoting this as well, ask the member if I can take a picture of you so that you've got that visual. Okay, and we can talk a little bit more about that, but I mean, we've had so many workplace violent incidents across the province. Just, I think it was at CAMH and Humber alone, there's 1,100 incidents of violence alone. Humber alone had 88 incidents of lost time in 2013. So that leads me into this slide, which is talking about the statistics. And our members reported in a survey that 54% have experienced physical violence, and we have about 60,000 members. If 54% have experienced violence, I mean, what does that say about the provincial data? It's got to be skewed, okay? We've got, in 2013, there was 2,087 lost time injuries related to workplace violence reported for the entire sectors, like every sector in the province, okay? WSIB reports that there's 639, so the most are in healthcare, 30.6%. But when you're talking about 54% of our members in a survey say that they've experienced violence, that tells me there's a huge problem with underreporting, and we need to get better at reporting every single incident. So this is a pictogram that ONA actually put together to demonstrate the extent of workplace violence when you compare us to manufacturing, construction, and mining. And as you can see, we have 639 lost time claims in 2013, and then you've got manufacturing with 77, and construction with 19, and mining with 1. What we would have liked to have done is to be able to get the statistics with the police. However, it's a little bit difficult to get because they're lumped in with government services. But Henrietta at PSHSA, thank you for the information, has indicated that for the entire government sector, there's been, I don't want to downplay that, there's been 700 incidents in the entire government sector, which includes EMS, police, fire, and all government offices. So it is safe to say that healthcare work is more dangerous than the police. And need I say more for those of you who don't know who this is? This is Lori DuPont, an RN and member who was murdered in her workplace by an anesthetist at Hotel Dieu Hospital in 2005. And it's because of her and all of the ongoing assaults that keep taking place to our members that it is creating a call to action, and something that we heard at the biannual, and we're all here again today, to do something about workplace violence, right from the ground to the government level.
So our reality, I think, is we are increasing the awareness of violence, but I think it's still a story that's very much kept within the walls of hospitals and units. And I think we need, as a society, to start to speak much more openly about violence against healthcare workers. You know, a couple of weeks ago in Toronto, a story led the 6 o'clock news, and it was someone had taken an iPhone video of a police officer being assaulted by two young females outside of a high school. It was the first story on the 6 o'clock news. And I thought, isn't this ironic? I bet you this happens, it does happen to police officers. I'm not trying to downplay that. But I wonder today how many healthcare workers got assaulted. Nobody's filmed it. And more importantly, the media doesn't talk about it. When it's a police officer, it's news. When it's a healthcare worker, it's business as usual. And we need to change that attitude. I think as a culture in our own buildings, we also have a history of accepting violence as part of the job. And we need to stop that. And we need to be much more willing to file incident reports. And not just in terms of violence, in terms of all safety risks for patients and staff. You know, we were telling a story yesterday. At East General, we've really encouraged the reporting of incidents. And in fact, we've wanted to see an increase in documented incidents. Not because we think they're happening more, but as a way to clearly signal that we're doing reporting. And in fact, when we hit 2,000 incident reports a couple of years ago, it was the front page story on our hospital newsletter. We had a party in the cafeteria to celebrate the 2000th incident. And we actually, the staff member who filed incident report number 2000 won pizza for their unit. So we've tried to take a very upbeat approach as opposed to, oh my gosh, don't file them, something bad might happen.
And I would, encourage every one of you to go back and tell this story to your CEO and say, what are you doing to encourage reporting? And that was just one piece of it. I mean, there's many ways that Toronto East is encouraging reporting. Faye also mentioned that she gets the accident reports. By law, every single leader is supposed to get the accident reports within 4 days of every incident. And Faye mentioned yesterday that when she gets them, she has a look at them to make sure that the flagging has been done and all these other interventions have taken place, because it's another opportunity to make sure that the checks and balances are in place in the workplace.
We've done joint advocacy at the system level. I have, I think, twice now in my career, co-signed letters with a president of a provincial labor association, and that's Linda. It's not very often a hospital CEO and the president of a labor group write letters together, but we've done it twice, and I think we've made a difference in terms of provincial policy. And that joint advocacy is so important. And I think we have a shared vision in terms of both zero tolerance and reporting. The only way you can make things better is to know about it so you can fix it. Our committee that we set up has done so much work. It is a real cross-section. I think one of the key things is for the first probably 18 months of our journey, I sat on the committee personally. Now it's a VP, but I get all the minutes, all the reports, and we've kept that hardwired linkage to senior admin, and I'll talk a little later about why that's important. And through that committee, we've done policies and procedures. I think we must have set a record for policy development. The first violence policy, I think we conceived of the need for it and had something out and posted within 6 weeks, which in a hospital where we have large bureaucratic processes is lightning speed. We developed a monitoring system so we could actually capture data. We started our process on risk assessments, and now that's a vibrant part of what that committee does. The action plans, everything was put to an action plan template, what we were going to do, who was responsible, when it would be done, and report that back. Through that group, we monitor incident reports, we did evaluation, and we did advocacy.
I just want to add that the committee was successful. If you have not got your CEO leading that committee at the beginning stages, it is not going to work. From what I've seen across the province, where it starts even with just the VP, and you haven't got the buy-in of the CEO, it has failed. So, when you're going out there and saying we need a workplace violence committee, make sure that your joint committee is also sitting on that committee, that nothing gets finalized unless the committee's consulted, right? And has had an opportunity for input into all written measures and procedures. And this is something, it was a bit of a learning as well at Toronto East, because what we learned was that they were doing all kinds of things, but you didn't have it in writing. Now the law, healthcare regulation, requires it to be in writing and requires the committees to actually be consulted in that development. And so Toronto East just kept getting better and better at putting things in writing. And they can actually, if the Ministry of Labor were to show up, not only demonstrate how it's being implemented, but it has the entire program. They have like all the actions that we've developed, all the letters, the letters with Linda and Rob, everything. You've got copies of absolutely everything to show here's our robust program. It's not just about a policy, which too many employers are trying to pass off as their program.
In terms of how, some advice on kind of what we've done in engaging people and sort of turning up the volume on it. The first thing we did was we made it personal and we made it very graphic. So the photograph here, again, these are some of the things that were in the little drawer of trinkets, I call it, things that in the prior year had been removed from patients and visitors to our hospital. And when I saw this, and then when I started sharing it with people, boards, physicians, other staff, people say, I had no idea. And this really was sort of helped us with the call to action. The other thing we've always done at East General is we've demonstrated the value proposition of what we are doing with measurement. You often hear in healthcare, oh, we don't have the money for that, we can't do it because it's not in the budget. We've just figured out a way to always show that there is value in doing this for the taxpayer and for other patients. And frankly, our costs are lower because of all the work we've done in violence prevention. And it's interesting, if you forgive me for sounding like a CEO for a minute, talking about budgets. Our hospital is going to finish this fiscal year with our 14th balanced budget in a row. And it's because we look at these things and not only look at it through the lens of quality and safety, but we know that quality and safety drives value.
I would highly recommend as well, when you take this away and say, this is what we need in our workplace, everyone, how many here have security in your facilities? How many don't have security? So not too many don't have security. So there's an opportunity here to go to your security department or whoever gathers these weapons, take a picture of them, and then say to the CEO and the board, I'd like to do a presentation to you on workplace violence and why we need to do something in our workplace now, like what Toronto East is doing.
Yeah. Right? You know, it's interesting. I even took my board chair to see the drawer of trinkets. And I did it because, you know, I think we in healthcare, we think the world works like the world we live in, our sort of middle class, well-educated kind of world. And I think a lot of people don't realize that there are very different aspects in our society. And so going and saying, did you know that this is what we took from our patients just last year? If your world isn't one of sharps or carrying a hammer hidden or that sort of, or other weapons, it just doesn't enter your consciousness that it would even be possible. And that's where showing was so powerful.
Go ahead.
So one of the first things we did, and this is, again, a great takeaway, and as a leader, this was very sort of informing for me. One of the first things we said we needed was signage. And so in our typical hospital way, we drafted a sign that was very clear, and then we sent the sign out to all our different unit councils and partnership councils and committees to get feedback before we would finalize the sign. The first sign was clear. The sign that came back after our collaborative, consensus-focused approach basically said, you know, we really want you to be nice to us. And that came back to the Violence Committee, and with the usual processes, has been through all the committees, everyone signed off, and I looked at it and said, you know what, this doesn't do it for me. So this is, rarely in my career do I pull rank, but I said, this isn't good enough. We're gonna go back and create a sign that is crystal clear. And the sign you see on the side is our signage in terms of zero tolerance. Big font, red letters, it's crystal clear. And that's where the executive leadership is helpful, because we could have gone with the nice sign. Everyone would have accepted it, but I don't think it would have had the impact that we were trying to have. That said, I can also tell you there were unintended consequences. And we posted these signs, and very quickly we started getting complaints from patients that I just sat down and the employee points to the sign and tells me, if you don't behave, you're out of here. And so what we had intended as a protection, as a shield, was in some ways becoming a tool of offense in a unintended way. So we didn't change the sign. What we did was we went back and re-educated staff and said, you know, you've got to be patient. You've got to, yes, this is here, but don't lead with it. You've got to, if you do that, in fact, you're being aggressive. We've got to find a balance. And that has since worked. But this was a very interesting journey for us, because we could have quite easily posted a sign that said, just be nice, and we would have ticked off the box that we had signage, but it wouldn't have had the impact that this has had. So the next thing or part of our process as well has been risk assessments. So we have sort of a three organization or tripartite group that helps us with risk assessment: an external consultant, staff from the area, and staff from somewhere else in the hospital. And we started doing these by focusing on our high-risk areas, ER, mental health. I would also, though, underscore that we have to really focus on geriatrics as well. We tend to often just, and this may be a societal thing, you focus only on the mental health aspect, but in fact, in our organization now, when we look at our confused elderly, patients with delirium, a general medical unit has just as much risk as any of the others now in terms of violence. So we do these assessments, come up with detailed action plans, and then start the process of one by one knocking off the recommendations so that everything is attended to. What we've learned, though, in the last number of months is the need to actually go back and reassess, not to see if everything was done, but I think our learning has been when you go back and look at an area after you've implemented all the recommendations, things that you didn't think of originally become obvious. So the example we used yesterday, which I think is just sort of neat, and I only learned about yesterday at the ER huddle, is we've done a second review in ER as a result of another incident. We always try to figure out what more could we do. And we've decided we're installing cameras and screens at the triage desks, because we found evidence that suggests, and just like when you go into a bank and you can see your own image on the screen, we found evidence that suggests that if patients actually see their image on the screen, they're less likely to escalate. So 3 years ago, 5 years ago, wouldn't even have been in our consciousness. And now we're putting screens in so that when the patient sits down at triage, they see they are on a screen. And we think that will have some impact. So the re-review is really, really important.
I just wanted to say, because you're probably all going, which external provider did you use? Because internally, I can tell you across the province, what I see is really weak risk assessments that employers are doing. I take Debbie, where's Debbie there? But yeah, the assessment that your employer did after the nurse was stabbed and almost killed in the workplace was one of the most pathetic risk assessments I've seen in the province. And they should have gone out and done an external risk assessment. And the two groups that we've seen that are doing good risk assessments out there is Stay Safe Management, which is Frank Simone's group, the one that's been doing it at Toronto East, and also Safe Management Group is another one that can do these external risk assessments. And it's not that Toronto East does external for every single unit, because they also use the Public Services Health and Safety Association tool internally for every department. But it's important to get a strong basis and a strong report to start with. What you really need to understand is that every single Joint Health and Safety Committee member is entitled to a copy of that assessment. So ask your reps, Did you get a copy of the assessment? The employer has an obligation to be doing them. Ask for a copy of them, and then make sure that the actual risks are being put into an action plan. I was shocked when I went to the always shocked when I go to Toronto East General Meeting of the Violence Committee, and they're already presenting to the committee the action plan that they developed as a result of the risk assessment. Now, Southlake still hasn't, and in fairness, they've done the assessment, but they still haven't even developed an action plan to action it. Now, they're putting themselves in a position of liability. So now they're looking at doing an action plan, but no one had to tell Toronto East to do an action plan. They just did it. So that's how your joint committee can put in place checks and balances, and the leaders can, to make sure, where's your action plan? Where's your risk assessment? I want to know, where is it?
Some of the security measures we've put in place over the course of the journey, so we significantly increased closed circuit TV coverage. We're now up to 350 cameras in the building. That is a great way to help investigate incidents, that sort of thing. Security training is another thing I want to just pause on. So we give them 40 hours of training per year. That's 5 days of training in de-escalation, but also in use of force. But every year, every officer gets 5 days of training. And I've seen actually on video, because of all the cameras, when they get involved in incidents, and they do incredible work, but they're also amazing at de-escalating things so they never have to use force. Communication devices are also a big part of what we've done. So early on, we used to have the old code white system where when there was an incident of violence, you were supposed to run to a telephone and then dial a number, and then security would respond. And we discovered these neat little personal communicators, and this isn't a promo for the company. I won't even use their name.
But I will as Vocera.
But these are neat little devices that we've rolled out across the whole hospital. In fact, we were the first hospital in the country to deploy them hospital-wide. And they're neat because they're a communicator. You touch the button and say, call pharmacy, and you're immediately connected to pharmacy. But if you touch the button twice, it automatically calls a code white. It opens up a two-way communication so security can talk to you, and it immediately tells security where you are, because all of our Wi-Fi gizmos, you can tell I'm not a techie, have an address so they know exactly where you are. This was a key part to what we did, because when we looked at the literature, we found that when you roll out single-purpose alarms, people carry them for a couple of weeks, and then it's just one more thing to carry, and they end up staying in the locker or never getting used. But make it an important part of getting your job done, and it becomes something you always wear. We've also hooked these into the nurse call system, so when the patient presses the nurse call button, the employee, the team's Vocera devices go off. And so this has been huge in terms of giving every employee an alarm. And in fact, what we've seen is we were able to reduce response times by security for a code white from when it's called to when the officer arrives on scene by 50%. And again, in a building of 1 million square feet, our average time to the scene is under a minute. That is crucial, but it's also a productivity improvement device. And this is where understanding the value proposition is so important. And that's how we sold the idea to ourselves, because you have to buy them, we had to go wireless, but it's been a huge enabler, and I think has created a much, much safer environment. And yet, when I talk to other hospitals who come and inquire what we did, what we often hear is, oh, we're told there's no money. This is where figuring out the value proposition is the way to do this. It's better for staff, it's better for patients. Training and education is also crucial, not just for security, but for all staff. So we've got online learning modules. We have an educational program on our policies. We've done workshops on de-escalation and physical safety techniques. We offer them to everybody, not just staff doing patient care, because you never know when you might encounter an incident of violence or potential for violence. We do a train-the-trainer approach, and I think that makes it more embedded in the culture. If you have an approach where you're always buying the expertise from a consultant, It doesn't become part of the fabric, the DNA of your organization. And so at East General, we really try to do as much as we can, like transfer the knowledge from the outside experts to us so it becomes ours. And that also then gives a whole different level of pride to it and to importance. We've done intensive training on patient flagging, and I'll get to flagging in a minute because I think that's one of the most controversial things that you'll get pushback on. And we also do, for example, emotional intelligence training, 4 hours of this for all hires. And this is important preventive learning, because if we understand EI and what are the triggers that escalate people, and how to see the signs of escalation, we can prevent escalation from happening and avoid a situation of violence.
It's really important to get the right training, and you have to remember too, how many have had the Ministry of Labor come in and they say, well, were you trained? But Ministry of Labor won't delve into the type of training. And what we are learning, and we are really going to be encouraging our members, is that when you do call the Ministry of Labor, you be sure to say, I need specialized training. I don't know how to even apply a restraint, yet I'm being told to apply restraint. No one has taught me how. No one's taught me how to defend myself, okay? A little bit of break free is not teaching me how to defend myself. And so we have to be specific when we are calling the Ministry of Labor about what you want. For those who don't have security, you want to say to the Ministry of Labor, we need security, or you're short-staffed, we need staffing.
So support is another part of our program, and all of these pieces are integrated. So I think I've already mentioned we were the first hospital to pursue and achieve the mental health at work standards from the new national standards. And we have EAP, we have really strong presence in occupational health. But I think one of the things that, again, is a little different at East General is when there is an incident of violence, one of the things OC Health does is ask the employee if they'd be willing to take a call from someone from the senior team. And one of the VPs or me will reach out to the employee if we get a yes. It's not to pressure them, it's simply to say, we're terribly sorry, and how are you doing? And are there things that come to mind that we need to do differently? And I think that is a great strategy to remind all of us on the executive team just how real the risk of violence is, because when we have to talk to a teammate who's been hurt, it just brings it all that much closer to home. Incident management, we've got an electronic reporting system, and this allows us to really figure out where problems are, what we can do to improve, identify trends, etc. We have really focused on increasing the number of incidents so that the more we know, the more we can fix. The other thing I'll say about incident reporting is, these cases end up getting into the system through different ways. Some staff will fill out an incident report right away or go to OC Health. Others might go to the ER. Others might simply call security. And I think the attitude we've taken is any of those doors is the right door. Once we know about it, we'll then bring the fullness of the whole program together, the reporting, so that every incident gets the same sort of review and reporting as any other. Patient flagging is an area where we get a lot of questions. Of all the things we do, we get the most questions on this, and people questioning, like, how can you do it? Why can we do it? So I'd start with, I guess one of the things I'd say right off the bat is we don't think twice in healthcare about flagging a patient who has a penicillin allergy, right? We put a fancy colored band on their wrist. We don't think twice about it. If you have C. diff, we don't think twice about putting a sign on the door. So why is it any different if we know an individual has a potential for violence? It's not only important for the staff, it's important for other patients. And so this is really done in the spirit of excellent quality of care. And we have to remember that this, knowing the risk factors that might cause an individual to escalate, is as important as knowing that they have an allergy. So we have a flagging system. It's electronic. where we can flag a patient in our electronic health record, and we have a very advanced EHR. We have signage that goes on the door, and there's a picture of it, and we've made the sign very clear and yet innocuous so that it doesn't look like we're branding people. That's not the intention. It's simply to warn our healthcare team that before you enter the room, you better just check to find out if there are issues that you need to be aware of, so that whether it's a housekeeper, a food service aide, a nurse, an RPN, a physio, we have that check. So some of the metrics that we've got, we've seen a 23% increase in flagging over the last couple of years, which tells us the system is working. We wanted to see an increase in incidents of violence reported, and we saw that in the first couple of years. Now it's decreasing, and we think that is because of a real decrease, not an easing of reporting. And again, we wanted to see the number of incidents grow, which we saw, and now it's starting to go down, which is exactly what we had hoped to see.
I think I also want to add here, you have an extremely low lost time rate.
Yes.
So there's almost no lost time rate.
Yes, that's a great point. So in 2010, we had 3 lost time cases. In 2011, 2012, and 2013, we had 0. But here, I think, is the really neat number. Our use of force has dropped. And what this says to me is managing violence in healthcare workplaces is a patient-centric strategy. Because every time we have to apply force, I think you run the risk that that's not being patient-centered. So what we've actually seen by training, getting to the scene sooner, all the tools we've had, we've been able to reduce the use of force by our security officers. And that, to me, is patient-centeredness. And we hear a lot of talk now in healthcare about putting the patient in the center, that sort of thing. Getting a handle on violence is something we can all do to, in fact, be more patient-centric. These are some of the key enablers, and I think I've kind of touched on most of these. And I love this quote from Jimmy Carter, that aggression unopposed becomes a contagious disease. And that's why we have to get on top of this and really, really start talking about it and managing it properly. And then just as a call to action, we have worked very closely with government, with ONA. I think there's an opportunity to standardize some of the measures. I think what we do with our security staff in training should be emulated across Ontario, because training drives improvement. The patient flagging approach is hugely helpful to us. I think you need accountability at the CEO, but in fact at all levels, and recognize the CEO needs to be engaged, but we're talking about changing a culture. That is not a command and control thing. That is about all of us trying to work together and in a different way. And that means sometimes, I have to turn the other cheek and say, yeah, we've got to step back and restart. But we really do need, I think, a call to action. This is something where labor and employers should want to work together passionately to make a difference. And again, I go back to my contrast with Ebola. If only we spent a quarter of the time and energy on this that we've spent on Ebola, just think how much safer it would be for all of the members of our healthcare team.